Imagine waking up, just swinging your legs out of bed and reaching for the shirt you laid out the night before.
Right, just a totally normal morning.
Yeah, exactly. But you go to grasp the buttons, and your own hands literally refuse to move.
Oh, man.
The knuckles are swollen, the joints are stiff, and suddenly, like, that basic blueprint you've used to operate your body your entire life is just, well, it's completely useless. The predictable routine where effort equals outcome is just gone.
It's incredibly disorienting, that sudden realization that your physical autonomy has just been compromised.
It really is.
Because we build our lives around this assumption of like a linear progression. You put in the work, you build the muscle, you gain the stamina.
Right, the basic math of fitness.
Yeah, exactly. And when a chronic condition enters the picture, that illusion of total control just shatters without warning.
And we are diving deep into that exact moment today. The mission for this deep dive is to explore how to actually redefine your fitness identity and your daily habits when your body stops cooperating.
Which is such a massive hurdle.
It is. We want to pull actionable wisdom on adapting to physical limitations, dropping the ego, and, learning how to play a much longer game.
Yeah.
Our core source material today comes from a really raw, honest piece titled When Your Hands Won't Cooperate. It was written by John Harris for his newsletter, Proud Boomer Wellness.
And Harris brings a very specific, valuable perspective here. He's certified by the National Academy of Sports Medicine, NASM, which means he has this really deep understanding of human movement and biomechanics.
He actually knows how the machine is supposed to work.
Right, but beyond the credentials, he's over 50 and writes specifically for older adults. You won't find like hype or miracle supplements in his work.
Just the reality.
Yeah, the visceral lived reality of aging and dealing with conditions like psoriatic arthritis, which is the specific autoimmune disease he manages.
And the way he describes psoriatic arthritis, or PSA, it really brings it down from the clinical literature directly to the physical reality. Like, he describes his hands literally not feeling like his own.
Yeah, that part really stood out.
The knuckles are visibly swollen. And he makes a point that you really can't explain this to people who haven't felt it. To a healthy person, complaining about stiff fingers sounds trivial.
Right up until you try to open a jar.
Exactly. Until you try to button a shirt and realize you are in for a legitimate fight against your own biology.
Because to understand the physical barrier he's facing, we really have to look at the mechanism of PSA. This isn't just standard wear and tear on a joint from lifting heavy.
It's totally different.
Right, it's an autoimmune condition. The body's immune system basically gets confused and starts attacking healthy tissue. Specifically, it targets the synovial membrane.
Which is the tissue that lines the joints, right?
Yeah, the tissue that produces the lubricating fluid. So when the immune system attacks, it triggers this massive inflammatory response.
Yeah.
Blood rushes to the area, fluid builds up, and the joint capsule swells.
Which causes that extreme stiffness and pain. Harris actually draws a stark contrast between that systemic inflammatory attack and, normal athletic fatigue. He writes that soreness is earned.
I love that phrasing.
Right, because when you do a heavy set of squats, you create micro tears in the muscle fibers. And the resulting soreness, that DOMS, or delayed onset muscle soreness, that's the feeling of your body repairing itself stronger than before.
You accomplished something.
You earned it. But a flare-up of PSA is entirely different. It's just this unpredictable inflammation that arrives on its own schedule.
Dictated by a confused immune system.
Yeah, and it leaves whenever it feels like it.
And because it's systemic and unpredictable, it forces you to completely reevaluate basic movements. Harris points out that because his PSA primarily affects his hands, grip strength is like the very first thing to vanish.
Which is a nightmare in a gym setting.
Oh, totally. Pulling movements like deadlifts, barbell rows, pull-ups, they become this complex calculation. The target muscles, like the massive lats in your back or your biceps, they might be fully rested and ready to work.
But the hands just quit the negotiation early.
Long before the target muscles even feel fatigued.
It makes me think of, like a car's transmission suddenly slipping.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Right, because the engine, which in this case is your back and biceps, the engine is revving. It's completely fine. It has all the power in the world.
Yeah.
But the connection to the wheels, your hands, is broken. So the transmission can't deliver the engine's power to the pavement, which makes the engine totally useless.
Exactly. And Harris also mentions that overhead pressing on a bad day feels like pushing against a door someone is holding from the other side. The physical mechanics are just jammed.
So what happens when people try to just muscle through that?
Well, treating a slipping transmission like a lazy engine will only destroy the car, right?
Yeah, you'll burn it out.
Exactly.
Hmm.
If you apply that to the human body, trying to push through systemic joint inflammation by simply trying harder is disastrous.
Yeah.
You aren't creating muscle adaptation.
You're just grinding inflamed connective tissue against itself.
Right. Yet the psychological response to this barrier, especially among men as they age, is often denial.
Oh, absolutely.
They talk around it. They claim they're just banged up or, a little stiff.
Yeah.
They quietly stop doing the things that hurt and pretend that was always the plan.
Harris actually has a devastating phrase for that. He calls it slow surrender dressed up as wisdom.
Slow surrender.
Yeah, and acknowledging that the physical machinery is compromised is the crucial first step. But looking at his timeline, the physical limitation is just the trigger.
Right. The real barrier is mental.
Exactly. The most formidable barrier to adapting isn't physical at all. It's the profound psychological grief of losing your established fitness identity.
A chronic illness really does force an identity crisis. If you spend decades defining yourself as an athlete or a lifter or simply someone who is physically capable,
A sudden limitation is terrifying.
it creates intense doubt. You start questioning the validity of your goals. The psychological burden of something like PSA is that it robs you of your presumed future trajectory.
And that's the mental spiral Harris describes so vividly. You start doing this toxic math in your head.
The math is the worst part.
It really is. You calculate how many good days you've lost to flare-ups this month. You project what that loss is going to cost you in long-term progress.
Yep.
And most dangerously, you start constantly comparing your current compromised self to the version of yourself that existed before the diagnosis.
Which is fighting a ghost. You cannot mathematically or physically win that battle.
So how do you break out of that spiral?
Well, the only way out is a fundamental philosophical shift in how you view the act of training itself. Harris realized he had been treating fitness as a contract with a specific outcome.
Meaning he expected X amount of effort to yield Y result.
Exactly. And when his body could no longer fulfill that contract, he had to redefine his training, not as a contract, but as a practice.
And to make that shift, he actually brings in Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher.
Which is fascinating.
It is. He points to the Stoic concept of working with what you have, not what you wish you had. But, I kind of want to push back on this a little bit.
Okay, let's hear it.
We constantly see ancient Stoicism, which was, let's be honest, forged by commanders managing plagues and assassinations and crumbling empires. We see it quoted in all these modern productivity blogs.
Oh, all the time.
Right. So how do we practically apply a philosophy built for warfare to something as seemingly mundane as missing a Tuesday morning gym session because your fingers hurt without it feeling like a hollow platitude?
That's a really fair question. But Stoicism, at its core, is really just a system of resource management.
Okay.
An emperor manages the reality of troop movements and grain supplies. An athlete manages the reality of joint nobility and inflammation. The scale is drastically different, but the mechanics of resilience are identical.
So the practice is the management part.
Exactly. A practice is simply the act of managing the reality in front of you on any given day. If your definition of success is the rigid contract of, say, deadlifting 300 pounds today,
Then a flare-up means you failed.
right. But if you redefine success as the act of showing up and intelligently managing the body you inhabit today, modifying your workout is no longer failing.
It's succeeding at the practice.
Yes, you are allocating the resources you actually have rather than mourning the resources you lack.
That makes a lot of sense. And making that mental pivot from a rigid contract to a fluid practice that forces you to completely re-engineer your physical approach to the gym.
You really have to leave your ego at the door.
You do.
Yeah.
Because once you drop the ego and stop mourning that ghost of your past performance, you can actually start implementing the specific, actionable strategies Harris uses to bypass his limitations.
And the practical applications are where the Stoic philosophy literally becomes biomechanical engineering.
Yes, the hacks. Let's talk about the lifting straps.
So Harris admits he resisted using lifting straps for a long time. There's this pervasive, stubborn pride in gym culture, particularly among men, that gripping the bar barehanded is a fundamental part of the lift.
Oh, yeah. Like, if you use straps, it doesn't count.
Exactly. Doing things the hard way is often conflated with doing things the right way.
But the reality, as Harris bluntly states, is that when his grip gives out before his back muscles do, He isn't training his back anymore.
No, he's just losing a grip contest with a barbell.
Which is such a great way to phrase it. So by looping a canvas lifting strap around the bar and his wrist, he completely removes those inflamed hand joints from the equation. He anchors his arms directly to the weight.
Mechanically, the strap acts as a synthetic ligament. It transfers the load from the small, inflamed joints of the fingers directly to the wrist and forearm.
Which lets him fully stimulate those large latissimus muscles without triggering more inflammation.
Right. It isn't cheating, it's precise target isolation.
Harris also talks about modifying the grip itself. On days when a standard straight barbell causes too much pain, he swaps it out for dumbbells or a hexagonal trap bar.
Which is brilliant biomechanically.
Because it changes his grip from a pronated position where the palms face the body to a neutral position where the palms face each other.
Yeah, and the physics of a neutral grip drastically reduce the mechanical torque on the finger and wrist joints. A straight barbell actually forces the wrists into slight internal rotation.
Which puts uneven pressure on the joint capsule, right?
Exactly. But a trap bar allows the arms to hang naturally at the sides with a neutral grip. It distributes the load evenly across the joint structures.
You know, that structural change is exactly like applying a software patch.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, like you aren't downgrading your computer's entire operating system just because one application is glitching. You simply install a patch to bypass the temporary bug in the hardware.
The inflamed joints.
Right, so the overall system can keep running smoothly.
And keeping the system running is the ultimate goal, which is why Harris strongly advocates for dialing back the load during a flare-up.
Just dropping the weight entirely.
Dropping it significantly. And it isn't a retreat. It serves a crucial neurological function.
Yeah.
Human movement relies on complex neural pathways. The central nervous system learns to fire specific motor units in a sequence to perform a deadlift or a squat. Okay, so if you stop doing it, if you completely stop performing the movement because the heavy weight hurts, those neural pathways begin to degrade. The body literally forgets the movement pattern.
Wow. So by stripping the heavy plates off the bar and performing the movement with just a fraction of the weight, you are essentially reminding your central nervous system how the machinery operates.
Exactly. You keep the muscle habit alive, you preserve the neural pathway without asking the inflamed joint to bear a heavy structural load.
You're just maintaining the communication lines between the brain and the muscle.
Yes. And he pairs all these biomechanical adjustments with strict temperature control.
Heat before, cold after.
Right. And he utilizes this not as a luxury, but as mandatory physiological maintenance.
He notes that inflammation doesn't love cold, but it tolerates it less, which is an interesting way to put it. Let's look at the mechanisms there.
Yeah.
Applying heat, like a hot shower or a heating pad, causes vasodilation. The blood vessels expand, pulling warm blood and nutrients into the stiff joint tissue, which increases its elasticity.
It prepares it for movement. And then following the workout, the joint has likely experienced some friction, which can signal the immune system to ramp up inflammation again.
So you hit it with cold.
Right. Cold therapy causes vasoconstriction. The blood vessels rapidly narrow. This physiological squeezing action actually helps push the accumulated fluid, white blood cells, and inflammatory cytokines out of the joint space.
It basically mitigates the swelling before it can fully set in.
Exactly.
So we have the lifting straps acting as synthetic ligaments, neutral grips altering the mechanical torque, reduced loads preserving the neural pathways, and targeted temperature control.
Brilliant engineering acts.
They really are.
Yeah.
But we have to address the reality that sometimes engineering just isn't enough. There are days when the flare-up is so severe that none of these workarounds are viable.
And that brings us to the most difficult skill in managing any physical limitation.
Knowing when to stop.
Yeah. Recognizing the threshold where adaptation must give way to complete avoidance. You have to redefine your concept of durability.
Harris details specific strategies for the truly bad days, right?
He does. When his grip and overhead mobility are entirely compromised, he abandons free weights completely.
He pivots entirely to machines. He uses the leg press or belt squats. He intentionally isolates muscles that are not downstream of the affected joints.
Which is so smart. If his hands and shoulders are locked up, he targets the lower body in ways that require zero upper body stabilization.
And his key takeaway there is his insistence that this highly modified workout still counts.
Yeah.
But the source material also forces us to look at the days where even the machines are out of the question.
Yeah.
Harris writes a sentence that he acknowledges took him a very long time to accept. He says, "Rest is not the same as quitting."
That concept generated a massive response in his community's comments. There was a reader named Joanna Ramirez who shared a story about her husband that perfectly illustrates the psychological weight of this realization.
Oh, the former bodybuilder.
Yes, he was a competitive bodybuilder and a karate athlete, very high level of physical capability. But he was diagnosed with a congenital hip structure issue.
And it cascaded, right?
Yeah, it affected his back and knees and eventually culminated in requiring a full hip replacement and ongoing medication.
Wow.
And for a lifelong athlete, accepting a joint replacement and permanent limitations, it requires a profound grieving process.
Joanna Ramirez details the painful mental journey he underwent, right?
Hmm.
He had to face the reality that he could no longer perform heavy leg or back days.
Ever again.
Yeah. The exercises that had defined his physique and his athletic identity for decades were permanently off the table.
She specifically points out how difficult it is for men to navigate this transition as they age. It's the exact same stubborn ego Harris confronted regarding the lifting straps.
But amplified exponentially.
Exactly. Losing the ability to grip a bar is frustrating. Losing the structural ability to squat or deadlift entirely forces a complete reinvention of the self.
And that reinvention requires shifting the ultimate goal from peak performance to sustained durability.
Yes.
Harris contrasts his current mindset with what he calls his past triathlon years. Back then, the entire purpose of training was a specific time on a clock or crossing a physical finish line.
The motivation was external and finite.
Right. But managing PSA or a hip replacement offers no finish line. There's no cure. The goal is no longer a personal best. The goal is simply staying in the game.
It's consistency measured in decades, not perfection measured on a single Tuesday.
Which brings up a highly practical dilemma for anyone listening right now who wants to apply this philosophy.
Okay.
On a cold morning, when the alarm goes off and you feel stiff and unmotivated, how do you accurately distinguish between the intelligent management of a condition and just plain ordinary laziness?
Oh, that's the million-dollar question.
Right.
And it requires radical, uncomfortable honesty with yourself. The distinction lies entirely in the physiological purpose of the rest.
Okay, unpack that a little.
Avoidance is retreating from a challenge because the effort is psychologically daunting. You skip the workout because it requires exertion, and you use a minor, normal ache as a convenient alibi.
Right, the excuse.
Yeah, but intelligent management is resting to preserve the structural integrity of the body.
So if going to the gym today and pushing through the pain will actively accelerate the joint damage
Yes.
and cause a severe inflammatory cascade that forces you out of action for a whole month, then resting today isn't laziness. It's actually the most strategic, logical choice available.
Exactly. Synthesizing Joanna Ramirez's account with Harris's framework reveals that true durability requires immense emotional maturity.
It really does.
It is the maturity to swallow your pride, step away from the barbell, and rest today so that the inflammation subsides, allowing you to train again next week.
Because laziness is constantly looking for an exit strategy.
Right.
But intelligent management is methodically building a bridge to tomorrow.
I couldn't have said it better.
So bringing all these elements together, the journey begins with the physical shock of an unpredictable limitation when the immune system attacks the joint and the standard blueprint fails.
Yep.
We explored the necessity of confronting the identity crisis, letting go of the toxic math of lost days, and shifting from a rigid contract to an adaptable practice.
And from that philosophical foundation, we moved into the biomechanical engineering. Using canvas straps to bypass inflamed finger joints, utilizing neutral grips to reduce torque,
Dropping the physical load to preserve neural pathways.
and managing vasodilation with temperature. Finally, we examined the emotional maturity required to embrace intelligent rest, prioritizing long-term durability over short-term ego.
You know, the real power of this framework is that its relevance extends far beyond psoriatic arthritis or the walls of a gym.
Oh, absolutely.
Whether you're managing an autoimmune condition, navigating a sudden career roadblock, or dealing with an unexpected shift in your personal life, the core principles hold true.
The illusion of perfection will always shatter.
It will. Durability and consistency are the only metrics that survive over the long term. You just have to figure out how to build the wall even when the original blueprint has been thrown out the window.
And that reality presents a challenge for you, the listener, to consider as you move forward. Look critically at your own routines. Where in your life are you currently engaging in slow surrender, dressed up as wisdom?
That's a tough question.
It is. What would change if you stopped mourning the ideal scenario you wish you had and started engineering a workaround using lifting straps, neutral grips, or strategic rest for the reality you actually face today.
Stop mourning the blueprint and start working with the materials you actually have in front of you. Even if your hands are having a really hard time buttoning your shirt this morning, there is always an adaptation waiting to be engineered.
So true.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We'll catch you next time.